Okay, let's think about this. What happens when, what everyone expects of you just clashes head on with what you feel you need to do? When tradition points one way, but your gut pulls you somewhere else entirely.
It's a fundamental human conflict, really.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Yeah, and we're doing it through a really interesting lens. Not some dry text, but actual dialogue from a historical drama. Specifically, bits taken from a YouTube video of that TV series, Buddha.
Right. And using this kind of source, this transcript, it lets us almost, step into that moment. It's not just about the big historical events, but the human interactions, the relationships, the tensions within a royal family, and this whole republic that feels like it's teetering on the edge of change.
Exactly. You feel it straight away. There's this buzz around Prince Siddhartha's new marriage, but it's not just congratulations. There are questions like, is he really focused on being a prince? On his duties?
And underneath all that personal stuff, you've got these political anxieties just simmering away in the Shakya Republic. Different groups, different agendas.
Yeah, different factions, you can sense them. So our mission here, for you listening in, is to kind of peel back those layers, use this dialogue to really get at the core ideas about, say, leadership changes, that whole tradition versus individual choice thing.
And the power struggles.
Yeah.
Sometimes subtle, sometimes really not subtle at all. We want to unpack how these things work, give you a richer feel for these, frankly, timeless themes.
Okay, so let's jump into the drama. One of the first things that catches your eye or ear is this sort of mystery brewing. A courtesan, Kanchani, has vanished.
Right, Mohini brings the news to the Maharaja. She's gone from the pleasure quarters right after the wedding festivities. It immediately sets off like little alarm bells.
It does, and what's interesting is how quickly the suspicion starts swirling. Who saw her last? Why are they immediately talking about Yashodhara's chambers?
Well, it shows how, in that kind of environment, proximity equals suspicion, doesn't it? Every connection is scrutinized the moment something's out of place.
Definitely. And then you get these muddled stories about Kamuka and messages Kanchani supposedly sent. It just feels murky, like potential misdirection.
Exactly. Layers of possible deception right there.
And then Jayeshta comes in and adds another layer entirely. Says Kanchani was manipulating Kamuka and stopped Yashodhara from meeting someone.
Yeah, that really ramps it up. It shifts from missing person to potentially active interference. What was Kanchani up to? Was she acting alone or for someone else?
Good question. It suggests this whole complex web of influence, maybe rivalries playing out behind the scenes, information, access, clearly powerful tools there.
But then, wow, Mangala enters the picture. Just hearing Kanchani's name sets her off.
It's a huge reaction, and it leads to this absolute bombshell. Mangala just confesses, I killed Kanchani. Just like that.
Whoa. Yeah, a massive escalation. And the reason she gives, that's where it gets really explosive, politically speaking.
Right, she says it was to protect Yashodhara from Devadatta, from some kidnapping plot he supposedly hatched.
Exactly. Suddenly, it's not just palace intrigue anymore. It's potentially high treason, a conspiracy involving another powerful figure. It makes you seriously question the threat level Devadatta represented, or at least how Mangala perceived it.
The fallout, if that got out, I mean, catastrophic for the Republic, right? It just shows how fragile things were, how far someone might go based on perceived threats or, loyalty.
Precisely. This very personal, very violent act becomes a sort of lens on the bigger political picture, which, speaking of, was clearly pretty tense itself.
Yeah, let's talk about those political undercurrents. That upcoming Sang Sabha meeting sounds crucial.
It does. Remind us, that meeting was put off because of Siddhartha's wedding, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So now the Maharaja and Siddhartha too, they're kind of on the spot. They have to answer for their actions, especially that big one stopping the war with Koshala.
And it's not just internal pressure, is it? We hear other rulers are making noise, Raja Dandapani, for instance.
Oh yeah. He's basically accusing the Maharaja of turning friends into enemies, warning the Maharaja's own allies. Pretty strong stuff.
He uses some quite vivid language, doesn't he? Something about venom, even without sharp fangs.
He does. And he mentions how some armies just weren't there during the war. It paints this picture of eroding trust, maybe resentment growing among their neighbors.
It really highlights how tough diplomacy is. Stopping the war might have seemed like the peaceful option, but Dandapani's reaction suggests it might have actually weakened their position, stirred up trouble elsewhere. Unintended consequences, maybe.
Definitely seems possible. And the core issue everyone keeps coming back to is Siddhartha stopping that war. You see the split clearly. Save lives now versus Well, what about later? What if Prasanjit attacks again?
It's that classic leadership dilemma, isn't it? Immediate ethics versus long-term security. Which responsibility comes first?
And there's the money problem, too.
Right. The treasury's apparently been drained by the war effort.
And yet, nobody demanded compensation from Prasanjit when they stopped fighting. That looks, well, strategically questionable to some people.
It does. A weak treasury makes you vulnerable, internally and externally. And asking for nothing. That could easily be seen as weakness. Maybe even encouraging someone like Prasanjit down the line.
Plus, there's that criticism about the soldiers, the wounded ones, their families. People saying they were neglected while the victory, such as it was being celebrated.
That kind of disconnect is really damaging, isn't it? Ignoring the sacrifices made. It can seriously erode trust in leadership. You have to look after the human cost, not just the political scorecard.
But Siddhartha himself offers a really different take on it all. He argues that war just breeds more war. His commitment seems to be genuinely towards peace.
Which is quite a radical stance for the time, perhaps. It suggests a different kind of power, doesn't it? One based on reconciliation, maybe understanding, not just military strength.
So all these tensions, personal, political, financial, they seem to converge at this vote of confidence in the Samsaha. And the way they voted was interesting.
The swords, right.
Yeah.
Placing their sword.
Yeah. And the result. Overwhelming support for the Maharaja and Siddhartha. Despite all the grumbling we heard about, publicly at least, they presented a united front.
It's quite telling. What do you make of that? Such unity in a charged atmosphere.
Well, it could be genuine agreement. Maybe people just wanted stability after the conflict.
Or maybe it shows the leadership is just very effective at, well, keeping dissent down. Or maybe it's just pragmatism, people siding with who they think holds the power.
The fact that apparently no one opposed them, it does make you pause.
It does. And any sense of relief from that vote must have been pretty short-lived, because then Prasanjit himself shows up.
Right. And he's clearly not over it. Still bitter about being beaten, talking about revenge. So much for peace.
His visit is just a stark reminder, isn't it? Internal politics aside, the external threats haven't gone away. His attitude makes more conflicts feel almost inevitable. They even mention preparing for it.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit back inside the palace to the more domestic side of things. Siddhartha's marriage, the expectations. Kakima seems quite involved.
She does. Her nudges for Siddhartha to spend time with Yashodhara, well, they really highlight the pressure, don't they? The societal expectation for a prince is clear. Fulfill your duties, produce an heir.
It's all about lineage, continuity. Even their personal relationship is viewed through this, political lens. The future of the dynasty.
Absolutely. And then you get those little scenes between Siddhartha and Yashodhara themselves.
Yeah, there's a bit of playfulness, but you also feel those unspoken things hanging in the air, the colored statue, the missing sindoor.
Ah, yes, the sindoor. Or the lack of it. That's significant.
Explain that a bit. The sindoor is the red powder, right? For
Yeah.
married women.
Exactly. Worn in the parting of the hair. It's a strong symbol of marriage. So if it's missing, well, it could be different things. But here it certainly raises questions about Yashodhara's state, or perhaps the state of their connection at that moment. It hints at something unconventional, maybe.
Interesting. And then the Kulaguru gives that gift the thread specifically for conceiving a son.
Right back to the pressure for an heir. It really throws Siddhartha's own apparent internal journey into sharp relief, doesn't it? Tradition pushing one way, him pulling another.
Which leads us right to the coronation news. Everyone's celebrating, apparently.
Widespread joy, it says. But Siddhartha,
He seems hesitant, not exactly jumping at the chance to be king. Why do you think that is?
well, his big desire seems to be to travel, to actually see his kingdom, meet the people. That's not the traditional path for a prince awaiting coronation, is it? Staying in the palace, learning statecraft from advisors.
No, it's very different. He seems to want a connection, an understanding that comes from experience, not just birthright.
And that causes friction with the Maharaja, who initially just says no.
Right. But Siddhartha holds firm, says he'll basically skip the coronation if he can't go see his kingdom first. That's a pretty strong stand.
It really is. It perfectly encapsulates that core conflict. We've been tracing personal conviction against the weight of royal duty. He's challenging the very definition of what it means to be prepared to rule. It suggests he might lead in a very different way.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've really covered a lot of ground. Palace secrets, political battles, the pull of tradition, the real cost of war, and, well, this emerging figure of Siddhartha who seems to be wrestling with his own path.
Definitely. Some moments really stood out. That whole Kanchani business, the manipulation, the violence. Mangala's confession, it was like a stark little drama showing the hidden gears of power turning.
Yeah, quite shocking. And then Siddhartha's own struggle, wanting that real connection versus just fulfilling his royal role, that feels very relatable in a way.
And hopefully, for you listening, digging into this dialogue has offered some useful ways to think about leadership, about change, about how personal beliefs sometimes rub up against these big systems we live in. These themes, they echo, don't they?
They really do.
Yeah.
Which maybe leaves us with a final thought to chew on. What actually makes a leader truly effective? Is it sticking to the script, doing what's always been done? Or is it having the courage maybe to find a different path, one built on really understanding things, on maybe compassion?
A big question. What defines leadership? Tradition or something else? Something new forged from understanding. It's definitely worth thinking about.
Absolutely. And if this dive into the Shakyas has sparked your interest, there's always more to explore: the history, the philosophy, maybe even watching the drama itself. Plenty more layers there if you want to find them.